Today is Monday, the 18th of March, and welcome everybody to lecture number 8 in our spring 2024 Honors Lecture Series on mental health and the good life strategies for happiness, wholeness, and well-being. And today's talk is by Professor Kent Syler, who is an MTSU Professor of Political Science and Public Policy in the, and I know it's newly being renamed, Department of Political and Global Affairs. So in addition to teaching at MTSU, Professor Syler has taught as a lecturer at the Paris Institute of Political Studies in France, where he introduced European students to the ideas and practices and institutions that constitute politics and government in the United States. Professor Syler has taught at MTSU since 2002, and he serves as a special projects coordinator for the university's Albert Gore Research Center. And among his many duties there with the Gore Center, he introduces students to archival constituent letters sent to U.S. Senator Gore. And they're worthwhile bodies of material to go through if you've never worked with archival materials. Senator Albert Gore Sr., after whom our Gore Center is named, for whom, was in the U.S. Senate before his son, who was Albert Gore Jr., also served in the United States Senate, and obviously he went on then to become Vice President of the United States. But it is Senator Gore Sr.'s papers that are archived at MTSU, and that collection is one of several very important national, really treasured archival collections that are housed here at this university. In terms of his political bona fides, Professor Syler has been directly involved in Tennessee politics for over 40 years. As a very young man, he started getting his hands in the mud on this, boots on the ground, as a campaign sound truck driver back in 1978. And then he went on to manage Congressman Bart Gordon's very first congressional campaign in 1984. Congressman Bart Gordon, as with Professor Syler, were both MTSU graduates, and Congressman Gordon served in the United States House of Representatives from this district, which at the time was the 6th, and it has vacillated the 6th, 4th, 5th, various terms over the years. We're currently living in the 4th district, but Congressman Gordon served 13 terms, is that correct? Which is 26 years. Obviously, House of Representatives is 2-year terms, and that's how long Professor Syler was with him, I believe, that entire time. And during those direct political engagement years, Professor Syler was also actively involved in dozens of other campaigns for political offices, ranging from city council to governor and U.S. Senate. And then he himself, of course, is very active in our community, serving on the Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Commission. He's a former chair of the Murfreesboro Greenways Committee. He's a member of the Murfreesboro Rotary Club and its past president. But he's here today to talk to us as one of Tennessee's most very respected political strategists and analysts, in addition to being a university professor. He's a regular political columnist, frequently quoted in the Tennessean and in national news, such as the New York Times. And perhaps you've taken a class with him. He's certainly one of MTSU's very most popular professors, and is very widely known on campus. But if you don't know him from having had a class with him or from being on campus, I'm sure that you know him from seeing him on the evening news, because he's a regular political analyst and commentator on WSMV TV, which is News Channel 4 here in the Middle Tennessee area. He's talking today about the poor mental health so many Americans are experiencing in the present day due to political polarization that plagues our nation and the world, actually, right now. And it eats into our national gut, and it damages us cohesively as a nation, but also very personally and internally in our families often, and in our own hearts and minds. So Professor Syler's talk title today is Fear and Division for Power and Profit, the Emotional Impacts of Divisive Politics. We welcome Professor Syler back to the Honors Lecture Series.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Evans, for very kind. And Dr. Weil, the reason I started teaching here in 2002 I was still working in the congressional office, but the way I ended up teaching here was the chair of the political science department at that time. John Weil asked me to come and teach a class, and I had honestly never thought of that, and was frankly a little scared, but I did it, and so I did it. I enjoyed what I was doing, and then when Bart retired in 2011, I talked him into hiring me full time. So if you'd never asked me to do that, I wouldn't be here today. So thank you. So this is, I guess, the third time I've done one of these, and Dr. Evans gave me one of the hardest that I've had since I've been doing it. How many of you find some things that are in politics disturbing? Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be, right? So what I'm going to try to do today is talk to you about ways to maybe minimize it, ways to deal with it, with that stress that comes along, and also I want you to be consumers, people who kind of understand what's happening to us. So, I guess I can click. First thing I wanted to do, though, was remind you of why it's important. Read that quote. Annabelle Clement O'Brien was the sister of Governor Frank Clement, very active, later a state senator. And I thought that, I heard her say that quote. Bob Clement, who's just in the right part, I've managed his campaign for Congress. And we were able to win that race. And I got to know Annabelle, and I heard her say that a lot of times. And politics is important. As disturbing or as, tough as it might be, it is important to remember why we go vote, all the things that government does correctly. And that's one of the things I want us to remember. Government does a lot right. It's just not used. And from all of the, we do together what we can't do alone, not only is it about programs, it's about security. If you read the headlines from Haiti right now, right? There's no better example of why we need government. So government is important. But government should be like elevator music. It should be something, and I heard Penn, y'all know who Penn is here? Penn and Teller, this is the big guy. He's a libertarian, yeah, he's a libertarian. I heard him being interviewed, and I heard him say that. And I thought, that makes good sense. That we really shouldn't wake up every morning thinking about politics. It should be something that is just in the background, quietly doing its job. But the last 8 years have been anything but that, right? It is something that is constantly in our face. And there's a lot of reasons that it is. Some of it's the personalities involved. Some of it is, and we're going to talk a good bit about media today, some of it's media. If you're cable news and you've got to fill 24 hours a day, elevator music doesn't really do that for you, does it? You can't talk about elevator music politics 24 hours a day. So you got to keep things stirred up. Got to keep things moving. So I'm going to ask you about the direction of the country, and we'll see how you match up with other people. So how many of you would say, so let me tell you a little bit about this measurement. Every poll we ever did, you always ask a question. Do you think things in America are on the right track, or do you think they're off on the wrong track? It's called right track, wrong track. And for a long, long time, it gave a pretty good measure. There was a lot of positivity. And the reason we do that is if you're an incumbent in the old days, if you're someone that's running for re-election and people say that things are on the wrong track, you know you've got a tough job ahead. So that's why it's important information. But it got to the point where it became really worthless because everyone was in such a bad mood. So how many of you think this country's on the right track? How many of you think it's on the wrong track? All right. Well, you are not alone. Look at this. From 2000, this just goes back to 2010. Look at the wrong track numbers. And a lot of the really interesting thing, we've become so polarized as a country that if you see, it's been relatively consistent, but there were 2 Democratic presidents with a Republican president in the middle, and it stayed almost the same. And what's kind of interesting about partisanship and polarization right now is basically the wrong track was made up of a disproportionate number of Republicans during Obama's term, but the moment Trump won, they went to the right track, and the Democrats who had been on the right track went to the wrong track. So, and then when Joe Biden won, it flip-flopped again. So basically, we're so partisan that if our president, if someone from our party is not president, then we think things are on the wrong track. Now, politics, we talked about fear. Politics has become very, very fear-based. And we only really see a lot of negative communication. Even before I left the congressional office, we were talking about, we were running a political campaign, re-election, and I wanted to highlight in our advertising a lot of the good things Bart had done, a lot of things he had accomplished, because we did, you know, the Family Medical Leave Act, we were the prime sponsor of, there were a lot of different things. And he says, Kent, everybody's in a bad mood. Nobody believes it. You can't tell them things are okay. You got to go after your opponent. So we ended up running a bunch of negative ads because that was the only thing that would move the needle. And you put every politician running and demonizing their opponent, running and demonizing government, then you get all of this super PAC money and all that coming in, all going for negative advertising. Now, some negative advertising is needed and gives voters information that is important. But it's easy to get too much very quickly. So the reason we get so much negative advertising now is it works, and fear is a great motivator. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. We are wired, you know, psychologically, for a good reason, right? We're wired to overreact to fear. So politicians take advantage of that. They take advantage of trying to divide us. So when you see these ads, remember, they're trying to elicit an emotional response from you. You want to hit that one? This tells a little bit about it.
Terrorism kills. And Barbara Boxer's worried about the weather.
What does Rand Paul stand for? Who did Kentucky Republicans just nominate to be their Republican nominee for Senate this November?
These days, watching political ads on television is almost as frightening as watching a horror movie, and it's by design. In uncertain times like this, politicians figure the best way to lure voters to the polls is by scaring the heck out of them. So in this week's Decoder, we decided to take a look at the history of fear ads and examine why they're so effective.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes.
There you have the mother of all fear ads when Lyndon Johnson tried to equate electing Barry Goldwater with nuclear Armageddon. That ad was effective because it played into concerns people already had that the hawkish Goldwater was actually unstable. A far more subtle and yet still ominous example of this genre came from Ronald Reagan's camp in one of history's strangest political ads.
There's a bear in the woods. For some people, the bear is easy to see. Others don't see it at all. Some people say the bear is tame. Others say it's vicious and dangerous. Since no one can really be sure who's right, isn't it smart to be as strong as the bear? If there is a bear.
Of course, national security is not the only thing politicians scare us about. Crime's always a winner, as in this attack on Michael Dukakis.
Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
In this election cycle, fear is all over the place, and no better microcosm for it than the Nevada Senate race. On the Democratic side, Harry Reid echoes his party's overall argument that Tea Partiers are too crazy to be trusted.
Teacher layoffs and no Department of Education. She's just too extreme.
For her part, Republican Sharon Angle echoes the overall Tea Party argument that un-American Democrats are destroying the fabric of the nation.
Illegals sneaking across our border, putting Americans' safety and jobs at risk. And what does Harry Reid do? He comes out opposed to Arizona's tough new immigration law.
So why do all these fear tactics work? For one thing, candidates find them useful for distracting voters from things they don't want to talk about. And it turns out it's in our nature. Scientists tell us that our brains are more hardwired for fear than reason, which perhaps explains why there's so little reason in our politics.
You got us there? There we go. So let's get on cable news a little bit now. And I mentioned it a moment ago, if you are a cable news channel, you are making money based on eyeballs. If you are an internet site, you're making money based on clicks. How do you keep people watching? How do you keep people clicking, right? You got to give them something that keeps them in an emotional state that makes them want to watch more. And so that's what we deal with day in and day out from cable news. And from, you know, how many of you heard of the cognitive dissonance theory? Yeah. So we make a decision, we latch onto it, and then we try to justify it. Now, you can go to these stations and they will tell you, depending on your point of view, how smart you are and how right you are. And the crazy thing about it now when you're on the internet is based on algorithms, I always say mess that up, but based on your past habits, you don't even have to search them out, they'll search you out. And they will give you something that they know you already agree with to click on, and then you're running down a rabbit hole pretty quickly. And so it is really tough to be a good consumer of political information right now. And here's another thing that they play on. Anyone know, so arousals or emotion, I'm going to psychology now, which is dangerous, but so, you know, these emotions and playing on our emotions, and Dr. Weil and Dr. Evans, y'all remember Terry Whiteside, right? Dr. Terry Whiteside was a psychology professor. I had him in persuasion when I was in school here in the 70s. And he did a great job explaining how emotions and arousals and feelings really play into how we make decisions, how we, commit to things. He had a story that I always remember that you could confuse arousals. He said maybe you are going on a date and you go to a restaurant and they don't have a table and you end up sitting there for a long time. Well, you spend the time talking, and that's when the feeling of love, you label that arousal as I'm in love. He said you might not have been in love, you might have just been hungry. So, but they use these things to elicit responses from us. Every time you watch a political broadcast, every time you watch news on cable channels that have a left or right mission, they try to keep you going. Politicians will do it to get you to either contribute. You get an email for a contribution, they're usually trying to stir you up. Yeah, because that's what it takes to get people to pull out their wallets. It keeps you watching. So understand what they're doing and how they're doing it. Now, what does all this emotion do to us as human beings? When someone is trying to stir you up all the time, do we want to be emotional and worn out and listening to this stuff even if we think we like it all the time? Is that healthy? Yeah, no. I mean, it's really not. It's something, if they are keeping us in a state of political agitation, because most of it's always negative, they don't really give us a lot of positive stuff, then that's not healthy. So I came up with an idea here. I borrowed the food pyramid, and basically my message here is limit the amount of time you spend watching this stuff or reading this stuff. Because you know that they do it, it's the same information over and over many times. Now it's important. This is not, as we're to establish first, this is important stuff. But yeah, I put it up there with fats, oil, and sweets. The rest of this you can fill out. This is kind of your life pyramid. And so you kind of know how to fill that stuff out. But yeah, that's where I would put politics. And I like politics. So, but that's enough. So, that the video we watched a minute ago was from several years ago. So none of this is new. That's one of the things I always like to preach. Other people have been here. And that's the great thing about an archive. Is a political archive like the Gore Center, I can go back and look at letters from the 60s to Albert Gore Sr. about labor, health care, race, violence, police, guns, and people are saying basically the same things now that they did in 1960. It's the same, almost same message. Now, this is one of those things, it goes back even further. So, part of the things I found in the Gore Center was from the 1960 Kennedy race against Richard Nixon. And Albert Gore had several letters about Kennedy's Catholicism from different churches around Tennessee. And one of the things that the anti-Catholic group was using, anti-Kennedy group, was this fictitious Knights of Columbus oath. And this had originated in a congressional House race in the early 1900s. So it had been around for a while. This is what we would call now a conspiracy theory, right? So this was a conspiracy theory, and look at what supposedly the oath said there. I mean, just something that we would find unbelievable, right? Well, a lot of people believed it. And Gore got this letter from a pastor of a Baptist church in Columbia. And you see it says, I received from the most sincere member of our church a copy of what is supposed to be the Oath of Knights Columbus, which is, as you know, a Roman Catholic secret order. After reading this, I am enclosing a copy that he has given me and request that you inform me whether or not this is published in the Congressional Record. Now, this is important because a lot of these conspiracy theories we deal with today, they have a little bit of something in them that gives them credibility in some context to make us try to believe it. And conspiracy theories are one of the more damaging things that I think in politics and in a lot of other things. And conspiracy theories become more and more believable the more and more isolated we become. And they work, there's some research about Steve Bannon, that Steve Bannon was into, before he got into politics and Breitbart and all that, was part of some organization that was selling things to gamers. And when he got into politics, he figured out that these gamers, I'm talking about excessive here and I'm painting with a broad brush, so don't. But these gamers, because of a lot of them being more isolated, were very susceptible to conspiracy theories. So when he got into politics, he targeted a lot of that group with some of these conspiracy theories. So how do you deal when you hear a conspiracy theory, what's an effective way to determine that this can't be true? How do we use logic to deal with conspiracy theories? Anybody? Yeah?
I would say if your first emotion is intense fear and stress, you kind of know.
Yeah, you can tell they're trying to push your button with it, right? The other thing that I like to tell students is, coming out of politics for a lot of years, Bart Gordon would always say, and this is totally true in politics, and there's a lot of true in life, there's no such thing as a secret. So every conspiracy theory you hear, how many people would have to keep a secret for it to be real? When we are virtually incapable of keeping secrets to begin with. Why is it hard for us to keep secrets?
We're social creatures.
Yeah, we're social creatures, and we like being listened to bring someone something that is interesting. And so we're talking about people being wired, we are counter-wired on keeping secrets, which is a good thing to remember. But that's what I always try to do, is say, okay, how many people would have to be keeping this secret? And then you generally figure out it's impossible. Now, Gore wrote back a great letter telling him that, answering his thing about the Congressional Record. The oath does appear in the Congressional Record, but as an exhibit in connection with the investigation that says it's false and libelous. I love that last line, in much the way we find the words of Satan quoted in the Scripture. So that's shutting it down pretty well. Now, why are we scared, and what's happening in society that makes fear a good tool? Change happens all the time, but this is a time of particularly rapid change on a lot of things. Our country is, whether it be demographics, automation, all of those things, global trade, a lot of things are happening and changing. But we have two groups. We have the groups for which change is happening too rapidly, And then we have the group for where change is happening too slowly. If you have been in the majority, maybe you're in a rural community, change is probably not being very kind to you. You see the country looking different, that creates fear. A lot of the jobs have been lost to globalization, and so there's fear there. If you are in a minority community, or a community that doesn't have all the rights of maybe the mainstream part of the population, then change is incredibly slow. To be able to get your rights and to be able to get equality on different, to be able to achieve equality. So things aren't happening fast enough for you. And I'll go back to the Gore Center a little bit. One of the things I always use with my students are letters that Gore got about the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And that battle was continuing then, and it had started 100 years before. And that battle continues today. So change is slow if you're in those communities. So we have those two groups struggling kind of over the direction of the country and seeing things in very different ways. Which leads us to kind of the whole political campaign ballgame. Most elections are about hope and fear. Hope or fear. And generally politicians pick one or the other or some of both. But we've been in really a cycle of more fear than hope. So I'll play you a couple of, here are some famous hope ads. Go ahead and start with Ronald Reagan.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
What if? What if there was hope instead of fear? Unity instead of division? What if we had a president who believes that we are one nation?
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Barack Obama, an organizer who helped communities devastated by plant closings. A state legislator who brought Republicans and Democrats together, who won health care for 150,000 people, a leader with the judgment to oppose the Iraq War before it began, a senator who championed reforms to rein in the power of lobbyists. What if we could restore America's place in the world and people's faith in our government?
We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America.
And we have fear. This is the full Lyndon Johnson Daisy ad.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
So this fear's obviously not you. This is, you could hear this today, too. 1968.
In recent years, crime in this country has grown 9 times as fast as population. At the current rate, the crimes of violence in America will double by 1972. We cannot accept that kind of future for America. We owe it to the decent and law-abiding citizens of America to take the offensive against the criminal forces that threaten their peace and their security, and to rebuild respect for law across this country. I pledge to you, the wave of crime is not going to be the wave of the future in America.
Pretty scary, right? All right, one more on fear, then we're going to get to solutions. Because this is going to be a scary year. I can't
Here's a question.
Can't put it any other way. You're going to be bombarded with this until we get to November, and hopefully it'll stop then. But all right, this is a Trump ad.
Just how far are the radical left and inside the Beltway bandits willing to go to stop him? We all know they hate him for winning the fight to protect life, for exposing their deep state, for draining their precious swamp. And they already know he'll crush Biden. So like a pack of rabid wolves, they attack. So let's impeach him. Let's get tainted radical left prosecutors to charge him. Let's conspire with Hillary and the FBI with fake stories about him. All to distract from Biden's incompetence, weakness, and money-grabbing corruption. But here's the thing, he'll never blink. That's called having the courage of your convictions. And it's why he's our president.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
From the Biden camp.
I've made the preservation of American democracy the central issue of my presidency. I believe in free and fair elections and the right to vote fairly and have your vote counted. There's something dangerous happening in America. There's an extremist movement that does not share the basic beliefs in our democracy. All of us are being asked right now, what will we do to maintain our democracy? History's watching. The world is watching. Most important, our children and grandchildren will hold us responsible. The Vice President and I have supported voting rights since day one of this administration, and I ask every American to join me in this cause. America is still a place of possibilities, where the power resides with we, the people. That's our soul. We are the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
So, that's going to be your year. Now, you are somewhat fortunate that we don't live in a swing state, so you're not going to be bombarded with this constantly. There's more money in this race than any industry, and there's only so much TV time and everything else time, but you're not going to see as much of it as people in other states do, swing states do. So what can we do? Ways to manage stress. Connect with friends. Stay connected with people, and we generally feel better when we interact and know that there are other people out there feeling a lot like we do. Acknowledge your feelings. feel free to talk about, this is what I'm feeling, and you'll find out that it's probably totally normal as far as politics go. And there's a lot of people who feel just like you do. Engage in healthy communications and seek community, stay with your groups. I talked about the people who, the more isolated you are, really the more susceptible to a lot of this, manipulation you will be. Be open about, hearing others' views. There's a lot of gray area in my world. I was in Democratic politics my whole life. But I understand that there's a lot of, there's a lot of good people on the other side, and sometimes they're right. If you think your party's right all the time, you're wrong. Because no party is totally right or totally wrong. So a lot of times you'll learn that maybe their view does make some sense for them, which helps us accept it more. Know your triggers. That's one of my triggers is watching cable news. Depending on what's on, I may be triggered in about 3 minutes or less. So I avoid doing that. And I do get triggered even a lot of times when they're telling me everything I know they want, that they know I want to hear, because that also makes me mad. Because that's kind of playing you. So don't let them play you. A lot of times it may be better to read more than watch, unless it's Channel 4 and I'm on. But no, reading is probably less triggering than watching. And have a multiple of sources too. Go to a lot of different places to get your information. And there are some websites that do a pretty good job of throwing a lot of different stuff at you from both sides. Try to take advantage of those, and when you're going down the menu of what there is available, don't just pick the ones with which you agree. Make yourself read one that you don't agree with. That'll give you some information. And then, Dr. Evans, this one is for you. Engage. Become civically active. That's empowering, because if you're participating, you feel, you're not only accomplishing things, but a lot of times you learn that it kind of changes what you believe and makes you less susceptible to manipulation. The election commission is always looking for poll workers. And one thing about going and working an election, they pay you to be a polling person. One thing about working an election is it teaches you of really how secure things are. And all of these vote stealing and things, when you hear that, you've been a part of it, and so you understand. And I, for 13 cycles, 26 years, and a lot of times with me running the campaigns, my future depended on an election. And I worried about absolutely everything. But one thing I never worried about was being cheated. Because that just didn't cross our minds. But that's just an example of the more involved you are, the better you feel, the more you learn, and you're out there actually making a difference, changing things. So civic involvement is very, very important, because this is government. We'll go back to the beginning. Government is very, very important to us. And government is us. Let's not forget that. A lot of times we see it as some scary entity somewhere. We're government. It's our responsibility. So we've got to be a part of it. So I've got one, and so for a little lighter, fun ending here, then we'll do some questions. This is a generic TV ad. This is a piece of comedy. I try to incorporate that into my classes. One of my students brought this in.
Hello, it's me, candidate candidate for president. A person with a face. A person whose hand gestures are definitely not weird. My advisors say that these sepia-toned photos of my parents are proof of my human origins. Wherever I go, so do lens flares and fields in sunlight. Machines spark in the foreground when I tour the few remaining places where they manufacture things. Here are a bunch of different people, matched with career signifiers, like a helmet, a uniform, or a stethoscope, with the off chance that you're identified with one of them. And here's a guy with a belly, a beard, and a hard hat. I've talked to this guy, I think. My favorite place is a local diner, because it makes me seem like a regular Joe, and makes white people feel safe and full. But I'm not racist. Here's a Hispanic family who doesn't mind being associated with me. And if you're thinking about retirement, here are some old people smiling. Thank God they're still alive to vote. I love the sunrise, and I hate thunderstorms. But my opponent disagrees with me. My opponent thinks thunderstorms are good. These people, why are they in your backyard? What do they want? Are they there to take all of your money? Are they there to kill you? Probably. Because I'm not president. Yet. I understand there's a lot to worry about right now. Like healthcare, and taxes, and foreign policy, and thunderstorms. My record shows that I can construct a narrative by keeping the details pretty vague. Families, the economy, faith, and education are all things I've addressed in non-specific ways. But I'll put these particular words right on the screen because they always get applause. Great, nation, troops, more, less, budget, security, veterans, children, jobs, future, strong. See, you can't deny that these people are clapping. Did I mention I'm super capable? I can stand behind a podium. I can look out a window. I can shake hands. I can make the skin around my eyes crinkle when I smile. I can make my family hug me. I can even pose for selfies. Right now is a critical time because of the past and the future and this American flag. I'm a candidate for president and I endorse this message. Unless you disagree, in which case I have nothing to do with it.
That's pretty real to life. All right, we've got about 5 minutes, I guess, for questions. Fears? Yeah.
You had mentioned avoiding triggers. How do you do this when a lot of disagreements with politics come familially? And it's not really something where you can get up and walk away from the family table.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've known in my Rotary Club, I had several people come and tell me that they, one left and one right, that they were estranged from their children. I tell my students when they are headed for Thanksgiving, there's a great Adele Saturday Night Live thing on the Thanksgiving I play usually where they start talking about politics anyway. But what I tell them is if they know that the conversation is not going to end well, which most of them aren't, that if somebody starts, just kind of shut it down or do something else. And I tell them, don't even tell them you're in my class. I mean, don't even say, not me, but don't even say I'm in American government or I'm learning to run a political campaign, whatever it might be. I said, because it's probably going to start you down the road. Because we do have to get along with everybody, especially when it's family. And that's, I generally try not to talk about politics most of the time. Yeah.
This isn't really a question, but my grandmother was in Congress for a while, and she wouldn't even talk about politics. She's like, nothing bums me out more than politics. Yeah. It's
Your grandmother?
Yeah.
Where was she in Kentucky?
in Tennessee.
Who was that?
Marilyn Lloyd.
Marilyn Lloyd, yeah. Bart and Marilyn were very good friends. So yeah, that's a good, and you know, I can't tell you how little politics is talked about in congressional offices, because we would generally only talk about things over which we had control, you know, because it kept us from doing what we would normally be doing. And what Representative Picard or Lloyd said about not wanting to talk about it because she deals with it all the time. We had a football coach here for many, many years named Boots Donnelly. And Boots could tell some real stories. And so there was a faculty press luncheon on Mondays, and a lot of times after he got through talking about his Saturday game, people would ask him if he saw some of the pro games on Sunday. And Boots would say, a postman doesn't go walking on his day off, and I don't watch football. So that's kind of, yeah, I can identify with that. Yeah.
What would you recommend for people who want to stay informed but avoid some of the negative effects of this?
Yeah, I would, and because I'm not saying, yeah, because the last thing I want you to walk away with is not staying informed, which I don't think you are. But you got to stay informed. I think a variety of things, and as close as you can get to straight news. And once you start into news as entertainment, it just is not going to work. But there's a lot of good journalism being done, and you know, journalism is under attack from a lot of different ways too. But it's incredibly important, and it is really how we find out what's going on. So you just be involved, read all you can, and try to get different opinions. Yeah.
Do you have any sources as far as like gathering information that maybe you use or you would recommend that are more unbiased?
Well, they all have biased content.
Yeah.
I go to Real Clear Politics is one I used to recommend to people. They have a whole lot of different things on there. And Dr. Vile, they put you and I's last May West column on there, yeah. So, but they have a lot of things. Now, I think they have gone somewhat right over the last few years and tend to have more right stuff. The other place I go basically every day is Drudge Report. And Drudge has a lot of, it's fairly sensational, so you got to deal with that. But Drudge was right for a long time. He's drifted, he doesn't like Trump, so he's drifted a little bit. They're a reposter is what they are, they don't do, but you can find a whole lot of things there. And then I go to CNN. And you know, my bank for a while, when I would go and do business, they had Fox. They had two TVs, one was on Fox and one was on CNN, and they considered that equivalent. And I never did, but I never said anything, but I you know, but it's, and I'm not saying CNN, I just don't know. It's hard to find any news now that people can agree on as being not biased, because basically if they say something we disagree with, then they're biased. Yeah.
And yet, facts.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is, facts are facts. You know, so just get the facts, check it out, and you know, a lot of it is just applying logic and problem-solving skills to what we get. You know, you've heard this, but the good news is we now have more information at our fingertips than at any time in history. What's the bad news?
We have
more misinformation at our fingertips than at any. So it makes it more challenging for you to be good consumers of this information, and you've got to have tools to do it. I think we're at the hour, aren't we?
We thank you, sir.
Thank you.